Welcome to Kindred. This is Lisa Reagan, and I am so happy to be here today with Riane Eisler and Darcia Narvaez, and we are going to take our time going through the amazing synergistic science between partnerism and the evolved nest. These are very important pieces that Kindred has been looking at for many, many years. We started off looking at the biocultural conflict for parents. Why is it that we have to choose between the biological imperatives that we need and our children need in order to be healthy, and cultural imperatives like having food and healthcare and shelter? So we're going to start today with Riane Eisler, and now we're going to hear her story and how she was drawn to developing the partnership method. Welcome, Riane.
Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here with both of you and to really answer your question about how I came to do this work. I have a great deal of passion for this work, as you know, and that passion is deeply rooted in my own childhood experiences as a child refugee with my parents from the Nazis. And from one day to the next, really, I and my parents, we became hunted with license to kill. And I was there on Crystal night when a gang of Gestapo men broke into our home and dragged my father away. So I witnessed that part of human behavior that is so often idealized, violence and insensitivity, real masculinity, if you will. But I also witnessed something else, and it's something that I today call spiritual courage. And it was the courage of my mother to stand up against injustice out of love. And she recognized one of the men as a young man who had worked for the family business, and she got furious. She said, "How dare you do this to this man who has been so kind to you? We want him back." And by a miracle, and yes, some money did pass hands, she got my father back. She got a safe conduit, and we escaped. My parents were able to purchase an entry permit to Cuba, to Havana, and I grew up in the industrial slums of Havana, where I witnessed another kind of injustice, the extreme differences in status and in wealth between those on top and those on bottom. It was before the revolution, of course. And all this led me to questions, questions which my research, my transdisciplinary research seeks to answer, which is when we humans have such a capacity for caring, for sensitivity, for really empathy. Why has there been so much insensitivity, cruelty, and violence? Is it, as we're sometimes told, very often told, just, quote, human nature? Is it inevitable? Or are there alternatives? And of course, years later, when I embarked on my research, I found that the answer is a resounding yes. There is an alternative, but we can't see it using the lenses of the conventional social categories or the conventional social analyses, which really leave out the majority of humanity, women and children, and hence family. I mean, there are other problems about, they really fragment our consciousness. These categories, they're about location or about ideology or about economics, rather than about the whole system. And of course, there have been regressive and repressive regimes in every one of these categories. So none of us tell us what we have to build in order to have a more sustainable and more equitable and more caring world.
Riane, can you tell us about partnerism specifically? Because it is a model And this is where the evolved nest fits in. As we talk about over here at Kindred, where we want to normalize nesting, and then we bump into a lot of the cultural barriers that prevent that from happening, doesn't support that, especially in the United States. And you have a lot of answers for why that is and how we can change that with partnerism.
Well, I realized early in my research that using the conventional categories that we've all been taught, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, was pointless for the reasons that I just gave. Um, and I've always been an outsider, so I started to think outside the box, really. And I drew from a very large database in my research. It is transdisciplinary and it connects the dots. And that's what we are taught not to do with this fragmented consciousness that is constantly instilled in us, and now even more so with social media, of course, and AI, which is also coming along the way. And so I drew from a database that, number one, includes both the male and female forms of humanity, in other words, the whole of humanity, and of course, everybody in between. That it includes not only history, but prehistory, which is a much longer span of our cultural and social evolution. And yes, that includes where we all live in our family and other intimate relations. And using this much larger database, this transdisciplinary database, I was able to connect the dots. And two configurations became visible, which are not visible using the conventional approaches, which I don't have to tell you are the study of man. And man is supposed to include woman, but of course, she's very peripheral and is purely a relational creature, either man's inspiration, according to Jung, or man's temptation, right? So, right there, we start already with a non-person. And what I saw are the partnership and the domination systems as a continuum, as a scale, the partnership, domination, social scale. And to quickly tell you the difference between them, it's really fundamental. In the domination system, whether it's Khomeini's Iran, fundamentalist Iran, or the Taliban, religious Eastern societies, or whether it's a Western society like Nazi Germany, or Stalin's former Soviet Union, or an African society like the traditional Maasai of Africa, there's a huge, huge emphasis on gender roles and relations. And in terms of my research, we really are taught that gender, well, is just a women's issue. But actually, gender, or just the homosexual issue, or God knows what, but actually, it is a key family, social, and economic organizing principle. And once we recognize that, we begin to see patterns. We see, first of all, that gender plays a very important role in the configuration of both the domination system and the partnership system. But even beyond that, and this is really where you see a confluence between our work, Darcia and mine. If you look at the organization of family, of economics, of all the social institutions, you see that they're authoritarian, top-down relations on the domination side. And the more you move towards the partnership side, more based on mutuality, on what we call human rights. But gender, as I said, plays an enormous role. And of course, children immediately see in their families, in a domination family, that difference, starting with the difference between the male and female forms, is equated with superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving. And you get in-group versus out-group categories, whether it's race-based or religion-based, or, it doesn't really matter. And of course, the level of violence is very different, because you have to have built-in violence, whether it's wife and child beating, whether it's pogroms or lynchings, whether it's aggressive warfare in domination systems, to maintain these rigid rankings of man over man, man over woman, race over race, religion over religion, nation over nation, etc. And story and language is a third force. What is considered normal, right? And of course, we're told this story that the abnormal, actually, and the traumatic is considered normal. And so we have been stuck in the wrong story, in the wrong box, really, for such a long time. And yeah, it's leading to all kinds of problems, including climate change, because anything that's coded feminine, like caring for a natural environment, is devalued in domination systems.
And, Western scholarship based in European Western Enlightenment philosophy and so on justifies all of this, right? So they rationalize, oh, this is the way it is. It's progress, and that's just what happens with progress, and all sorts of myths that support maintaining the status quo of domination.
Yes, but the Enlightenment was twofold. When the Enlightenment first started, was a period of disequilibrium. The Industrial Revolution was beginning to go into high gear, and you had one movement, organized movement after another, challenging, quote, the same thing, a tradition of domination. I mean, think about it. The Enlightenment challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their subjects. The feminist movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the castles of their homes. The abolitionist and then the civil rights and now the Black Lives Matter movement challenges another so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over an inferior one, all the way to the environmental movement, which challenges man's once hallowed conquest and dominion, right? It's there in the Bible. Man shall have dominion over everything that moves on this earth. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, you're quite right, that when reason became distorted because of what I call the hidden system of gendered values, where caring, caregiving, nonviolence was, for both Smith and Marx, not even part of either socialism or capitalism. At the same time, there was also beginning to be movement challenging the domination system. And today, of course, we're in a period of regression worldwide towards domination. But at the same time, there are millions by now, and certainly many, many thousands, if not millions, of small groups working on partnership in one way or another. But we lack the frame. And we lack the emphasis on family because we lack the frame, and on gender.
So Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson wrote a book called Cultural Creatives back in 2001. And that book really helped me as an activist because I was struggling with why am I finding so many people kind of under the radar who are interested in holistic everything and especially parenting, but the messages were completely missing in the mainstream of life. And what Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson found, they were marketing specialists. They weren't looking for this group. They found that there was a third of the population that was growing who they are interested in holistic living. They are interested in changing the fabric of our culture, but they needed two things, he said, and I've kept this in mind the whole time we've been doing our work here at Kindred. He says two things are missing: coherence. So today, I really feel like talking to the two of you. We're trying to get coherence around the story, and the story is possible, and then visibility. And because we don't have millions of dollars to push our messages out there, we're not seen. And he said, we're also the people that you're going to find at work being quiet about what you believe because you feel like he says a cultural creative may feel like a weirdo or an oddball, and they often self-identify as kooky or crunchy, but really they're just operating from a different emerging and expanding group of people in this different worldview. And I have found that to be true as well, and that I think is very hopeful. So with the coherence piece, Darcia, can I ask you about the Evolved Nest? I feel like the tremendous overlap between your vision and Riane's vision of what is possible for human being looks at our past, and there's proof there of who we were and what our potential really is, what our capacities are. And so I'm just wondering, in the Evolved Nest work, it looks like we could rewire our culture by rewiring our neurobiology.
Well, certainly that's part of what's needed. And we have forgotten our species' normal wellness promoting pathway. And we've adopted a trauma-inducing pathway for millennia now. And it's gotten much worse in many ways for children in recent centuries and decades in comparison to hunter-gatherer civilization. So the Evolved Nest components that we look at in my lab and in the research that my collaborators and I do are apparent still around the world in hunter-gatherer civilization and other traditional societies. And we can see that people in those societies who are nested throughout life are much more cooperative. They are honest. They enjoy being with one another and enhance one another's well-being. And they feel connected to Earth. They are earthlings and enhance the life of the ecological community they're in. So we have a lot that we've lost. Now there's things that we have created and technologies of all kinds. And so the challenge now is to integrate our wellness-informed and wellness-promoting way of being with the advances in technology and perhaps some scientific knowledge so that we can move forward with a human future and not extinguish ourselves and many other species.
I was wondering, because alloparenting, the whole community being responsible and being caregivers, really, women, men, everybody in between, that's something that I really have thought about a lot. Because there are people who are moving into communities where they basically are, cooperate in the care of each other's children, etc. But how do we really get back? And from my perspective, we're never going to get back unless we stop coding caring as, quote, feminine, as weak, as soft. And that's where the gender piece is so important here, because I mean, we don't want to go back to gathering hunting times. Um, and I say gathering hunting because really most of the work is gathering rather than hunting. And certainly we know now from archaeology that women did some hunting, even pregnant women, which is really, but we've been written out of history. I mean, like you know, the museum dioramas, right? They're always about a male, you know, emerging from our lineage, our primate lineage, which is absolute nonsense. I mean, everything is so very much based on gender, isn't it?
Well, that's really important point. Yeah, gatherer hunters or hunter gatherer civilization. We can see it still today in the Congo and the, Central Africa, that they are very much about communal child raising. They don't care so much about who the father is, right? It's like the village of care. And one key aspect that's been identified by anthropologists is the cooperative child raising that brought about our big social brains. And to make that happen, the women had to uh, coalesce, build coalitions of support to keep the alpha males from taking off one woman to have sex with her. And instead, they're controlling those alpha males from how much access they have until they bring back the meat. So there's the radical anthropology group have identified how women have did this for hundreds of thousands of years, where they follow the moon cycle in their menstrual coordination of their menstrual cycles. And then they, with their brothers and relatives, male relatives, are controlling the alpha males so that they can't take over and dominate. And it's one of the anthropologists, Morna Finnegan, calls it what they've observed contemporaneously, communism in motion, because the women will start to tease the men, especially the elder women, to keep their egos from getting out of line, from becoming alpha. And they, will come through the camps and dance and sing and tease, and the men just have to put up with it, because otherwise they won't get, what they need. So it's really quite interesting to know that we have an option, like you're presenting with us, that there's alternatives to this misery that we're in now, and this rigidity and this domination.
And it really doesn't mean that matriarchy is our alternative. It means that partnership is our alternative.
That's right. And matriarchal studies.
Matriarchy is
Yeah.
just the other side of patriarchy, really. I mean, it's mothers call the shots instead of fathers, and that's not, linguistically, that's not what we are after. We don't want to. I mean, economically, I always say, we don't want an existing, a bigger slice of the existing pie, economic pie. We want to bake a better pie.
Yes, and matriarchal studies of today actually point out that matriarchy is not about the domination of females over men. It's actually archaic, means from the beginning. And that means mothers and mothering and nurturing and everyone nurturing is central to becoming a thriving community. And so people just misunderstand. Oh no, the guys worry, oh, we can't have women in charge. They'll do the same thing to us that we've done to women. No, that's not what we're talking about. Partnerism, the original understanding of matriarchy is about working together, cooperating, collaborating, so everybody can thrive.
And unfortunately, the term matriarchy, even though it is adopted by the Minangkabau, for example, which are really a partnership society, it gives that connotation. And that's why I stay away from patriarchy and matriarchy. And because it isn't just men over women, it's men over men. I mean, think about it. Men in domination systems have had to give nothing less than their lives because some guy on top, like Putin today, wants more real estate. And not only that, men have to suppress part of their humanity. I mean, they get some emotions, they get contempt, they get anger, but they don't get any of the quote soft, quote feminine emotions. So we can't really get away from this gendered system of values, which is really so baked into our economic. I have proposed 4 cornerstones, as you know. It starts with what you focus on, childhood and family. But it recognizes that they're all interconnected. And so it goes on to gender. And I think that given the fact, I mean, I am a woman and I have daughters, and I was married twice. I mean, once it was kind of a disaster. We tried to fit into the male, female, masculine, feminine roles, and it just didn't work. And the last 45 years were a miracle, but it was a partnership. David Loy was my partner, and he was just so wonderful, you know. But anyway, partnership is more pleasurable, and partnership helps you realize all of your human potentials. And you and I, as professional women, I don't think we want alloparenting. We want men to also, and we're back to gender again, aren't we? To also do, but the system, the economic system, is not set up to reward that. In fact, both capitalism and socialism leave out the 3 life-sustaining sectors. Think about it: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. I mean, for both Marx and Smith, caring for people starting at birth was to be done for free by a woman in a male-controlled household. But that was the 1700s. The 1800s. We're today in the 21st century. So we really need to change the system and to build the foundations, those 4 cornerstones. And I absolutely agree with you that parenting, but is so intertwined with the other 4 cornerstones. I mean, think of the fairy tales we teach children, like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. I mean, Sleeping Beauty can't even wake up without a man showing up, right? And Cinderella, I mean, she's hopeless, you know, and the stepmother, you know, the older woman is blamed, right? The father, forget about it. You know, and I mean, it is really a question of looking through the lens of the partnership domination social scale. And I did write a book on economics, you know, the real wealth of nations. And I don't think we're going to have alloparenting unless we are going to have changes in the rewards of our economic system. And there are some trends towards that, you know, government. I mean, nations that are much closer to the partnership configuration, like Nordic nations, like Finland, Norway, and Sweden and Denmark. I mean, they have paid parental leave. Teachers are very well paid and very well valued, including, you know, kindergarten and early childhood teachers. It's a whole different approach because they're caring societies. They're not socialists. They have a very, very healthy market economy. And I don't know, you know, that seems to be invisible to people who keep calling them socialists, but precisely because they have caring policies.
So I'd like to integrate something the 2 of you hit on a few minutes ago, and that is the idea of alloparenting. And what I have seen in our kindred calls that we have monthly with different professionals and parents from around the world show up and share their stories And what I am hearing is they are finding each other, as we were saying about cultural creatives. They are looking around and finding each other. And I think it would be, if I could say something to parents or people who may one day have children, it would be, this seems like forever at the time, but it is such a small portion of your life. So it's not a commitment to a forever village. It is for now to meet the needs of the child. So if we focused on, if we were to actually center the evolved nest and say, here are the needs of the child actually does need to have many adults around them to pick them up and carry them and teach them to bond with other human beings instead of that pressure, as you're saying, Riane, on this one woman stuck in a house by herself in a nuclear family disaster model. This isn't, we know it doesn't work. We know right now half of all women are saying, young women are saying they're not going to get married at all. Twice as many women have sterilized themselves to make sure they don't have children. And in the United States, the birth rate is plummeting. And I could go on with some really horrible statistics around pregnancy and birth in this country. It is the most dangerous place to give birth. And that's even USA Today covered it. We've got mainstream news covering those pieces. But so to plan ahead and to think this way about what are the needs of the child, what are your needs going to be, not the forever village, which might not be possible, but for now, some kind of alloparenting village, since people are moving around anyway, you probably wouldn't stay in one place for very long. But I do know from raising my own child that you do find parents and you do create this pulled together village in the beginning anyway, even if you're not right close together where you can rely on each other, that kind of naturally happens. But facilitating that process with an awareness of now we're going to focus the needs of the child. I'm going down this hole because I'm thinking about who's listening to us in the Nesting Ambassadors program and the people who are listening to us right now, helping them. Reimagining Humanity is one of the films Darcia has put out there. And as we reimagine humanity, and you have advocated for us to not rebel against the dominator system, because that could just drain us of our precious energies, but to consider reconstructing, what is that going to look like? So also combining reimagining and reconstructing, and where are we going to go from there?
It's important to make a distinction between babies and children.
Yes.
Babyhood is a significant period in the life of a human being because we're born. We resemble fetuses of other animals till nearly 2 years of age. And so babyhood needs to be secure, connected, always physically involved with the caregivers, the nurturers. And boys need more of this. They are behind, well, they mature more slowly, have less built-in resilience, and are more easily toxically stressed from social shame and humiliation. And what we've done in the dominator culture is we've given boys less nurturing than girls on average. And so you end up with boys that have to use these protective, self-protective mechanisms that are innate: fear, domination, rage, and then they become the alpha males that we think is normal, right? So we have to get back to nurturing babies properly, 0 to 3 in particular, but till 7, especially for boys. And then we can start to diminish the number of alpha males and distressed, disorganized dominators that are controlling us.
Well, I think that we are beginning to recognize trauma, which I see as a partnership trend. And certainly there are more and more studies now of how prevalent trauma is. It isn't something, way out there. I mean, so many people are sick because of trauma, physically, not to speak of emotionally. And I mean, it's so interesting, but as long as we think that disruption, we're going to get disrupted big time at this moment. That's not our job. Our job is to show that there is an alternative, to provide a frame that connects the dots, and to get people to have to wake up from what I call the domination trance, frankly. And it's not easy because so many of the stories, including the fairy tales we still tell children, are just baked into the domination system, not only men, but princes, royalty. I mean, those on top are idealized. I mean, we really have to examine what we are taught and what we teach our children.
Riane, could you tell us about bioculturalism?
Well, it's a term that's gaining more and more currency because what and Darcia knows this very well, that this whole argument about nature and nurture, it's really a red herring. It's not nature or nurture, it's nature and nurture. And what really we have to pay attention to is actually what we can recreate, which is our culture. So the issue is not one of biology is destiny, because biology isn't destiny. We know, for example, that everybody, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Putin, Hitler, they had terrible childhoods, didn't they? And they just knew one thing: you either dominate or you're dominated. And that is not the only alternative. For millennia, and Darcia's work shows this as well, we lived more in cultures that orient more to the partnership side. Cultures that really valued the quote, what we've been taught as feminine, of caring, caregiving, nonviolence. We don't even have a word. It's nonviolence. Have you ever thought of that? I mean, our language really keeps us trapped, doesn't it? So for example, hierarchy. I make a distinction between a hierarchy of domination, which is, the blade, right? The power over, power to take life, essentially, eventually, and the chalice, the power to, the power with, power to create that we all have. And a hierarchy of actualization, power is conceptualized more as chalice power, as power to and power with, rather than power over. And what we see is really traumatized people tend to go into denial, don't they? I mean, climate change denial, election result denial, COVID-19 denial, reality denial, really. And that is part of trauma, isn't it? And so, from my perspective, domination systems are trauma factories, starting in families, going on to the rewards. And, we reward greed and accumulation, which can never be a substitute for the kind of caring connection that we so yearn for, starting as babies. I mean, if there's one yearning that's built into human beings, it's the yearning for caring connection. And I don't care how much you accumulate or whether you have a cave like in New Zealand guarded by, an armed militia, that is not going to help at all. What helps is changing the reward system economically, because poverty is traumatic. And frankly, being in a domination system is trauma in so many ways.
You have to punish people to be dominators. You have to punish children to obey, which
Yeah.
is very contrary to indigenous ways of raising the young.
Well, you've put your finger on something fundamental, which is that studies show, uh, and I write about this in my latest book, which you gave a lovely comment about nurturing our humanity that I wrote with Douglas Fry, who's an anthropologist and an expert on peace, basically. But what we're finding out is that men who were raised in dominator families tend to vote for punitive policies and to feel entitled.
Yeah, that's the ego defensiveness they've built up to survive. Yeah.
Absolutely, because the one sop that men get in domination systems is their domination over women and children. And it ruins us all, doesn't it? I mean, I remember being in a park years ago and hearing some crying. And then I heard a male voice saying, and I'm going to hit you until you stop crying because boys don't cry. And that sums it up, doesn't it? I mean, really killing the part of the human part.
Yeah, it wouldn't be tolerated. And Native Americans were just astounded that the Europeans would hit a child. Because in the indigenous perspective, you have a unique spirit in that child and you can't interfere with it. If you do, the spirit may leave, the child may, die and become, just kind of unrecognizable. So you have to be careful and nurturing and supportive of whatever that child's inner spirit guides them. They have an inner compass towards growth. And so you provide everything they need as a baby, and you assume they're going to be a community member, cooperative community member. Why do you have to do any teaching? They're going to imitate and pitch in. So you allow them to do what they can as they
if they're allowed to. And I mean, because I've asked you to be part of it, about the Peace Begins at Home campaign, which launches in the fall. Hopefully it'll launch in September. And hopefully we can all work together on just that one thing, ending violence in families, and stop talking about domestic violence, which immediately, is ancillary. Talk about what it is. It's violence in the family and what a terrible traumatic effect it has on everybody, including the perpetrator.
Yes, and that goes back to brain development and nurturing from babyhood on, and prior generations, the epigenetics you can inherit of the anxiety from your parents' experience, your grandparents. And so we need multi-generations of nurturing to restore our partnership way.
And there are many trends in that direction, but they're all disparate. And of course, because of the rules of the game, which do not reward not-for-profit work.
Yeah.
In other words, the work that keeps society somewhat, but it's like Band-Aids. And so we need both the tactics. I mean, we have to put out the fires. You have to alleviate some of the suffering caused by domination systems, but we also need together to work on the four cornerstones and shifting them from domination to partnership. Because if you really think about these societies that I mentioned earlier, whether it's fundamentalist Iran or the Taliban or Hitler's Germany or Stalin's former Soviet Union or the Maasai of Africa, gender is a big, big issue in all of them. How you bring up children in families, that families have to be male-headed, right? I mean, why? I mean, there are many other ways of, you can have matrifocal families, matrilineal families, and it's not the same as matriarchal, even though we call partnership-oriented societies matriarchal, because I think that's a mistake, really. because it makes men feel, my God, like you said, Darcia, I don't want to be treated the way that women are treated. No.
The other thing that the Evolved Nest adds is to get away from anthropocentrism, right? That partnership is also with the rest of nature, right? Partnership with the animals, the plants, the waterways, the mountains, with the cycles of Earth, and not just be thinking about human, needs and interests. But we are part of Earth. We are Earthlings, and to have that kind of consciousness in our economics, in the way we raise children, in the stories we tell, is really important too.
Absolutely. And unfortunately for both Marx and Smith, if you read their works, there is nothing about caring for nature. I mean, that's feminine, right? Nature is there for one thing, to be exploited. And, that was the mindset that they were taught. We need to leave that behind. And really the struggle for our future is not between right and left, capitalism, socialism, any of the conventional, religious, secular. It's between domination and partnership. And that's what I've devoted my life to, and what you're devoting so much of your life to, Darcia, starting with how children really need to feel that caring connection. I mean, we know the studies about children in orphanages in both Romania and in China, girls in China, where their brains don't develop at all. I mean, there are regions of their brains that even when they're adopted, they have a very difficult time making up for not having that caring connection.
Yeah, there's sensitive periods for all sorts of systems that come online throughout babyhood, and then the time passes. So then you have gaps in your brain, and then as you develop, the brain tries to, make up for it, but over time it can't, and then you end up with problems in adolescence or adulthood, like anxiety, depression, suicidality, and we're planting those seeds or the lack of care throughout dominator culture, so that everybody is a little bit, easily stressed, right? And threat reactive to some degree in some situations, at least, if not all the time. And then that changes your blood flow away from your higher order thinking, and you're not going to be open-minded or open-hearted. You're just going to hang on to whatever script worked in the past. And, some authoritarianism just looks really attractive because the strong man's going to save you. And and you can withdraw and lean on them and not have to think and not feel and just be, survive. But you're in this fear state, really hard to get out of, a lot of healing needed. We need to do a lot of healing with all the adults in these societies, as well as raising the kids properly.
Absolutely. And there are so many trends. I mean, even the Nobel Prize in Physics was, as you know, given to two men who wrote about our entanglement, our interconnection. I mean, it's a fact of physics. It's a fact of life. And this ranking versus linking and the hierarchies of domination, because we do need we need some loci of responsibility, whether, in the family, we need parents, we need teachers, we need managers, we need leaders, but it's defined differently. And everything is defined differently in a partnership or domination system. I wrote my book, Sacred Pleasure, is really it's my favorite book, actually, because it foreshadows so much of what I've written later. It foreshadows my work on economics, on education, tomorrow's children, on neuroscience, really, what we're learning from neuroscience, which confirms all of this, that yes, that we are interconnected. And to just deny this and keep ranking us and keep having in-groups versus out-groups, it's a distraction, and it's a traumatic distraction. And I'm afraid we're going to see a lot of suffering in the next few years in the United States. But the old system is not meeting our challenges. So our job is to really work on foundational work, family and childhood, and yes, translating that into practical terms like peace begins at home, and connecting the dots, for goodness sakes. I mean, when I was in Colombia, the then vice president had been kidnapped by FARC, and he wanted to talk to me because I mentioned, some of that, which I know, that trauma starts in the family and it leads to violence. Children who observe violence or who experience violence learn an important lesson for domination systems, which is, that those on top, they may use force against those on top, on the bottom, including spanking, which even the APA has said is not only inefficient, but harmful. But that is not getting out, is it?
And there's a recent study that came out that confirms what other people have noted, and that is that if children watch violent television before age 5, they looked at, they were more violent as teenagers, more disruptive, and so it's the media also has to change. So it's not just our
Absolutely.
families. Yeah.
And there are people working on different media, but not together. And what I'm trying to offer here is a different frame, a different paradigm, a different worldview, because
Go ahead.
that is what we need for starters.
Yeah, so we've been working on the indigenous worldview as well, the kinship worldview that you can actually adopt. Even though you weren't raised nested, you weren't raised with it, you can actually look and compare what the dominant worldview has. And my colleague Four Arrows has 51 precepts he's identified that vary between the kinship worldview and the dominator worldview. And you can start to see your own life, assess which one? I like this indigenous thing, but how am I acting? How do my institutions I participate in, how are they acting? And then you realize, oh, I'm not doing what my values are. And so that a kinship worldview is really a partnership. It spells out all sorts of things. And there's probably more than 51 we could add, but that's a place to begin.
I want to talk about just for a minute the cultural piece and what you're saying with worldview, because I have found that until we go through that worldview awareness process, at least becoming aware that we have a worldview, the evolved nest sometimes feels like it's coming out of, what is this? What do you mean I need all of this? And so I took, for example, the U.S. Surgeon General just came out with an advisory on parent stress, and it had recommendations at the end because the parent stress is the statistics are through the roof. 48% of parents are too overwhelmed to function at most days. And the leading cause of death in new mothers is suicide in America. So I took the recommendations from this advisory that came out, and I took it to ChatGPT and said, apply the evolved nest science to these recommendations, and let's see, what does ChatGPT come up with? And what it came up with was, well, things are going to be different in these recommendations because the culture would have to believe in biology. So even AI recognized that biology and a basic belief in biology is not here for us culturally to back us up on making these choices that we need to make as parents. And That piece, I've had a lot of fun over there with ChatGPT asking questions about worldview and putting that worldview chart in through and comparing as well. I also compared your work and saw tremendous overlap. I think I'll share that wherever we put this up eventually for the Nesting Ambassador Program, because it was fantastic to see what AI could come up with. So we're coming here to the end of our time together, and I am so amazed and thrilled and wonderful to be able to just, again, listen to your stories, share this time together to show how this vision is so synergistic, and one is helping the other. I come to this work with the heart of a parent, and my heart is still there with parents who are trying to follow their heart and find that impossible and end up feeling despair in this culture. So I am looking for this story to bring forward this story with coherence, and then use our tools that we have, limited as they are at Kindred, to make visible a new story that we're reimagining here. Is there anything that you would like to add when you're speaking to these professionals that work with parents and families, and to the families themselves?
Well, I would like to add that one thing, which is that for millennia, well into the early agricultural era, we oriented more to partnership. And indeed, neuroscience shows, and certainly Darcia's work on the Evolved Nest shows, that this is, if you will, is more congruent with human needs. But trying to change yourself without also changing society and the rules of the game and the rewards of economics, etc. As I wrote in my book, The Power of Partnership, it's like trying to go up on a down elevator. Because, like the statistic you gave about the stress of parents, you keep getting pushed back. We also have to work on the larger picture and not just try to carve out for ourselves, because otherwise we'll always remain peripheral, won't we?
The Evolved Nesting Ambassador Program is conscious of our complex systems that we live in, but we know that complex systems will change if there's enough variation, enough turbulence around the edges. And so our goal is to provide the training and the guidance for nesting ambassadors all over the world to plant their seeds and start to bring about more turbulence so that we can change that complex system to be more about human well-being instead of money well-being, instead of billionaire well-being, right? It's well-being for planet Earth.
And for all creatures who live on this, well, really beautiful planet of ours.
Yes.
Well, thank you both again. I'm going to list your resources, Riane, right below this, wherever it appears. And we have our own to list as well. Darcia, thank you both so much for being here. Thank you so much for articulating this vision that took you both a lifetime to explore and present to us. So thank you, and thank you for sharing it on Kindred. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.